Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Life by Design podcast. On this week's episode, I talk with Anton Fulmen. Anton is the author of two books, The Heart of Dominance and The Dominance Playbook, and is a kink and sexuality educator specializing in power exchange. In this week's episode, expect to learn about interpersonal power and authority, BDSM, kink consent, how BDSM transfers out into the real world, how to hold power, and much, much more. Enjoy the episode. Now, guys, before we start this week's episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about the Life by Design Mastermind. The Life by Design Mastermind is the mastermind for go-getters and high achievers who are looking to create a more successful, fulfilling, and balanced life by design. If you're serious about transforming your life, achieving your goals, and living a life on your terms, then the Life by Design is your golden ticket. Head over to the show notes and click on the link for more details about the program. Anton Fulmen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Mate, I fucking loved your book, and it's right out there for the average person. I assume it's not right out there for your world, but I find this space fascinating. BDSM and kind of the wider topic of sexuality, and looking very much forward to exploring all things in that realm today. But before we get started, can you give the guys a 60 to 90 second spiel of who you are and what's got you to where you are today?
Sure. I will abbreviate. I have had, I guess, a fairly winding interest through life. I've been interested in all kinds of things. I've worked in everything from writing software to hazing bears. But one of the very few things that has been a passion for me through life and has always fascinated me has been interpersonal power and authority. Not like the power of governments and corporations and such, which is interesting but depressing. But the way that power and authority flow in relationships between people who care about one another, because it's always there, whether it's conscious or not. So I fixated on it from a young age. I have been interested in it both in the personal, it turns me on way, and then maybe because of that, I've explored it more intellectually, and I've learned about it, I've studied it. When I was in college, I discovered that there was a whole community of people who play with this interpersonal power and study it directly in the lab, as it were. And I was immediately hooked. I moved across the country to find a place where I could join that community. Much easier to find now, harder back then. There's a lot of education that happens within that BDSM community or kink community. It's the language has changed over time. People would say kink now more than BDSM. I slurped up that education. I got engaged with a fascinating, wonderful little guerrilla sex education nonprofit called San Francisco Sex Information that is the secret source of a lot of the sexual revolution from the 70s onward. And I got training through them and went to work with them and became a trainer, and eventually started doing my own teaching, and that was well received. And I've always scribbled my thoughts So eventually enough of those came together that I felt like I could edit it into a book. I did. That was very well received also. So yeah, I didn't exactly set out to make a career of my passion, but it just sort of happened. I wandered my way there. I wrote a second book because people seemed to think the first one was interesting, and here I am, still doing in-person education from time to time, and still enjoying the journey and the learning about interpersonal power for my own sake.
There's a lot even in that, mate, which I'm
I
really
blew over
interested.
your 60 to 90 seconds.
Hey,
but
mate, that's all right. We got time, brother. One thing that you said there that I found really interesting, and I've been kind of sitting with my own relationship with power, and I'm actually, by the time this is out, I will have gone past it, but I'm going to do a plant medicine around it. I noticed for me, my relationship with power had very negative connotations, power over people in a very manipulative way. your language, power with people that care for each other. Is there a
Yeah.
lot of people in your world that found that almost conflicting? Like my brain was kind of almost scattered as you said that, going like, how, like I've explored this world and I kind of understand it on a kind of intellectual level. But when you said that, something kind of really landed for me. Is that a common theme?
Yeah, it's an oxymoron, right? Power is a you talk about like feeling sort of conflicted and sort of a sense of I forget the word you use, but like concern around
Mm,
around holding power. And yeah, power is inherently oppressive. Power is the root of oppression in the world, right? If you didn't have power over anybody, so many bad things just couldn't happen. And why do you have to have power unless it is to make somebody do something they didn't want to do? So yeah, I think anybody with any sense of decency is going to come at power exchange with some conflict and some skepticism. And at the same time, I think that's a lot of what draws many of us to it is the paradox, is the conflict, is wanting to kind of poke at that dark place of humans holding power over one another and the frisson of power exchange, the excitement of it for many people comes from navigating that, from finding a way to flirt with the darkness of power and come out better off for it, and better off individually and together between the people who are doing it together, right? To have it strengthen your relationship instead of having power strain your relationship or tear it apart.
Mate, it's fascinating just power, let alone all the other angles that will take, over the kind of next 45 minutes to an hour. What do you when you talk about interpersonal power, what does that look like both from a kind of sexuality, BDSM point of view, and how does that transfer into like everyday life?
Yeah. So if we're talking about how people exercise it in their relationships, in their dynamics, under this big broad umbrella of kink or power exchange, it will vary tremendously. An awful lot of people are interested in intentionally playing with power exclusively around their sexuality, right? And that's the boundary. We make a container of, when we're in bed, when we're doing sexy things, I'm going to do what you tell me to. And, within these limits and with these boundaries. And then outside of that, when we're talking about how we pay the bills, where we go on vacation, how we raise the kids, we're going to do like most people of goodwill do, and try and make that as egalitarian as possible. And other people do want to integrate some degree of intentional power dynamics into their relationships outside of sex. And I say intentional power dynamics intentionally because all relationships have power dynamics. And we can try to make them as egalitarian as we can, but I don't think it's ever possible to really fully 100% make a relationship completely equal in every way, right? It's something we set as an ideal, not as a practice. So sometimes power exchange is a way of surfacing the power dynamics that are there, of going from power dynamics that exist but we don't admit to power dynamics that we explicitly negotiate and try to arrange in ways that suit both parties. And then the other side of it is that as dark as power is, there are people who want to be under someone else's power, for whom it's exciting, for whom it's safe, for whom it's fulfilling. Different motivations for different people, right? That's not a list of everybody has to have all those motivations. You'll find your own constellation of motivations in each individual. And for folks like that, it can feel really comfortable and happy to be in a relationship where there is some negotiated space in which their partner is in charge. I also really make a point of talking about that negotiated space. So the naive idea of having a power dynamic where you have power exchange outside of the bedroom might be that, one person says, I'll do anything you want forever. And the other person is like, okay, I'm in charge now. And sort of that's it. And off you go. That is an approach that is unlikely to end well. Most people who do this realistically for a long time, in a way that continues to be good for everybody involved, negotiate carefully to create a container around their power dynamic, a set of boundaries, both in terms of what it's not going to cover and what it has to include. So like, I'm going to be under my partner's authority in our relationship, but we're going to have my relationship with my family be outside of that. So there's a boundary there. Or I'm going to be under my partner's authority, but I require that they communicate with me every day. Like there can be inclusive and exclusive kinds of facets to a container. So yeah, yes, people do give over broad swaths of authority over their life to their partners. And I gave a long answer because I wanted to be really clear that it wasn't just as simple as take me now and off you go.
I think that's a really valid and valuable point, especially for those that are new to BDSM. And we'll kind of break that down in a sec as to what that means. Knowing, consent boundaries. And the first time before I kind of entered this world and started to explore it, I heard the word consent and I was like, oh, that just means yes or no. Like that's what consent is. And then I kind of looked into Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent and kind of looked bigger. And I actually have found
It's a good
fucking
model.
fascinating topic. And then to your point of negotiating power and authority and knowing where it stands and where it doesn't. And you give such a kind of beautiful example of, sometimes that power and authority exchange just happens in the bedroom. And then you go back to kind of life as normal after, which again, for people, they might struggle to understand if they're new to this world. But what is the importance of boundaries and consent? And if someone's starting to explore this world, and we kind of go into that in a sec, like where do you even start with boundaries and consent?
Oh, that's a broad question. Yeah, first off, you say before you start engaging with this whole subculture that exists around BDSM and all of the education that and the community wisdom, consent just means say yes, say no. And sometimes I think it's unfortunate that our community has latched onto the word consent as what we're using to describe this thing we do, because yeah, the dictionary definition of consent is just permission, but that's not really what we're talking about. Something much bigger and deeper than that. And we might, maybe we should have said assent, or we should have said mutuality or collaboration or something, because those get closer to what we're talking about. It's not just permission. I like to call that skydiving consent, which is, before you go skydiving, they give you a form you have to sign at the bottom that says, if I die falling out of this airplane, you can't sue me, or you can't sue us. I think I got the you and us mixed up there. But that's insufficient for having power exchange go well. It's not just permission. It is mutuality. It is making sure that what you're doing together is an experience that is going to be good for everyone involved. And one of the concise definitions of consent that I've always liked is that consent is everybody getting to choose the experience they want, which concision means that you're going to lose some detail. But as you've seen with Friedman's very good Wheel of Consent model, trying to have a actually detailed model of consent gets kind of complicated. Like it's the whole diagram. It's got lots of parts. And actually, I don't think any of our models of consent that we've come up with are even perfect. Right? They don't all, there's no little diagram or no list that captures everything about it perfectly all at once. So a place to start would be reading about some of these models of consent, and not just one of them. Right? Betty Friedman's Wheel of Consent is a great one. There is the the Fry's model that Planned Parenthood promotes. There is a great book called Yes Means Yes that is several authors writing essays on consent. And so you're getting multiple perspectives and not just like a definition of consent, but sort of examples of what this might look like and different people's takes on it. So do some reading first and get a sense of what these different models are. Don't just read one and believe it's the truth, but absorb a bunch of them and start getting that bigger picture of what it might be other than just skydiving consent. You said yes, so now you can't sue us.
I love it.
And then when you start doing actually, going to do the thing, going to do practice kink, going to or get into a power dynamic, just start small. Come in with the understanding that you don't know everything at the beginning and the humility to not try and do it all at once. Far too often the fantasy of power exchange, and it's okay for this to be the fantasy, but the fantasy is that you are totally new and you're an ingenue and you're innocent and you get swept off your feet, usually by a billionaire who just like takes you directly into total full-time, complete surrender. And that's a great fantasy and a terrible thing to actually try, right? What you want to do is negotiate with somebody to have like one thing that they have authority over for one evening and see how that goes. And then try negotiating one thing for a weekend, or maybe two things for an evening, and build up step by step. And if you start small and are cautious and humble about how you grow your practice, you're way less likely to get in over your head or get hurt.
So with that, let's take it right back to the start so people who are new to this space have something to kind of build the foundation of. What does BDSM stand for, and can you give examples of what that looks like in the world of kink?
Sure. To actually get the definition, BDSM is a compound initialism. The B and the D are bondage and discipline. The D and the S are dominance and submission. And the S and M are sadomasochism. So compound because the two letters in the middle stand for two things at once. And what that really tells you is that people who practice BDSM are huge nerds. We came
I've
up with
never
this
thought of it like that, but I
this
appreciate that
super
insight.
super goofy compacted little acronym to label this thing we do. The downside of this acronym is that sometimes it gives people the impression that there are three little silos, that there's B and D, there's D and S, there's S and M, and that those three together make up BDSM, and it's all very neat and tidy, and you can kind of categorize things. You can't. That's not really what happened. What happened is that back on Usenet in the early days of the internet, different people called this different things, and they got into big arguments about it. And some people wanted to call it B and D, and some people wanted to call it S and M, and they all kind of smushed a bunch of their different labels they wanted for it together into one label. It's not actually that there's three tidy little categories. So how I would define BDSM roughly is that it is playing with power and pain for the sake of mutual gratification. Anything that looks like that. And that is a smorgasbord, not a prefix menu. You don't have to do all of it, right? You don't have to do bondage and spanking and a power exchange relationship and be attracted to pantyhose and want to get needles stuck in. Like, you don't have to do all of it. It's another big misconception for people starting out. They're like, oh, I can't do this because I saw this video where somebody got set on fire and I don't want to be set on fire. That's okay. You don't have to be set on fire. You get to pick which things you want out of it. So a lot of people will do rope bondage. Rope bondage is a hugely popular part of this world, and they don't have any power dynamic to it at all. Right? There's no bossing around. It's the person who likes getting tied up says, hey, I would like to be tied up like this. And their rope partner is like, great, that's fun. Let's do that. And off they go. So you get to pick the things you like out of BDSM. And even my definition of playing with power and pain for mutual gratification is fuzzy around the edges, right? There are people who come to BDSM events What they really want to do is dress up in leather and look exotic, which isn't power or pain really, but they're welcome. Sure, come on in. You look great.
So if you were to break those down for a beginner and give some kind of examples of what each of those look like, where would we start if we break down each of those?
Yeah, you asked about examples. So for the B&D and the DNS and the S&M, very roughly, SM is the easiest to define because sadomasochism means playing with pain, or folks who want to be a little euphemistic might call it intense sensation. That means pain. And so that might be a spanking is probably the most commonly practiced form of SM, even by tons of people all over the world who would never say they're into SM, right? But I think it's sexy and fun to get a little slap on the bottom while they're doing sexy stuff. And that can range all, there's a ton of ways to deliver sensation in the world. So there can be floggers and whips and canes, all kinds of hitting. It can be playing with electricity, which is one of those things that you really want to get specialized training for, but can be done safely. People really do get set on fire for short periods of time. That's, again, you
Where?
really want
Like their
specialized
hair?
training.
I haven't explored the burning of
Hair
hair, but
would be a
where?
bad idea. So do you want the
Mate,
basics of
I am
it?
literally interested because I
Yeah,
love this world and I've explored a fair bit of it. I have not seen someone set a light yet. Not that I'm
yeah,
interested. Well, never say never, but
maybe you
I'm
want
interested
to.
in it. Yeah, 100%.
So, as with a lot of things around BDSM, fire play is mostly theatrics. Right? A lot of this stuff is the fantasy, and it's the appearance, and it's, putting on a big scene. You're not getting set on fire enough that you're actually getting burned, right? It's done, the most common way to do it is by using 70% isopropyl alcohol. And that percentage is also important because if you get 90% isopropyl alcohol, it's way too hard to put out. But if you use 70%, there's different ways that they'll apply some of the alcohol to the body. Like, people will commonly use a fire wand, which is a dowel with cotton around the end. You soak the cotton in alcohol. You can put some alcohol on somebody. You can light that alcohol on fire. The alcohol flames up very dramatically, and then you have like a wet cloth and you wipe it out real quick and you put it out. And I said it before, but I'm going to say it one more time. Don't do that without going to getting some training in how to do it, which exists. You can
Mm.
find specialized training in exactly how to do that safely. My description does not count as specialized training for doing that safely.
Even just quickly to speak to that, I might get you to expand on it because one of the things I found really interesting, just for people, the importance of learning this properly, even something like spanking needs to be thought through because there's certain organs and stuff that you want to avoid. So, for people exploring the world of BDSM, spanking sounds like a really kind of low entry point. But even then, being mindful of where, if you get in a flogger or anything like that, being mindful of where you hit them because there's vital organs in certain spots you want to avoid as well. So I just want to kind of expand that out to not just the fireworks, but even kind of what, some people might see as basic BDSM tools and exercises as well.
Yeah, that's true. I think I always want to be able to maintain a distinction though between things that are relatively low risk and setting someone on fire, which is quite high risk. Because
Yeah.
sometimes I think that the kink community gets so focused on small risks that we then lose perspective on big ones. So open-handed spanking of someone is pretty hard to damage them unless you're a really, really strong person and you're like spanking their throat. I mean, like, you slap somebody on the butt, they're probably going to be okay. There are some good things to know, right? You want to avoid hitting the coccyx really hard. You want to stay low on the butt and hit the big meaty parts of the butt. But again, I think sometimes when we get really focused on everything being risky, people who have been spanked and have spanked a bunch of people in their lives and didn't have to get a training to do it, then tune out all of the safety precautions. They're like, oh, you people are full of it. I mean, I can spank somebody, it's fine. And then they they start adding more things to their repertoire, and then they get up to like playing with needles and they still think everything's fine because they've tuned out all the safety warnings. So I always try to maintain a little perspective of there are things, everything has risk, but there are some things that have more risk than others. And I really want to be able to tell people, like, when you start breaking the skin using fire, using electricity, if you're going to do those things, like, get some serious training on them first.
Great call. So I've kind of explored S&M a little bit, but I might get you to even break down those words a little bit more. Just again, someone who's a real beginner, like what are we looking at with those two?
The sadism and the masochism, those
Yeah.
two words.
Yeah. Like what do those mean for someone who's kind of exploring this for the first time?
Yeah, and it seems like a simple definitional question, but you can really go down a rabbit hole there too, because they don't mean the same thing for everybody. I won't go into the history of them is funny and interesting, but I think we're more interested in the present, right, of what they mean for people today. So sadism means enjoying inflicting pain, masochism means enjoying receiving pain. But it's not true that there's just like one kind of person in the world who, quote, is a masochist, unquote. It's like jogging. People jog to lose weight, but not all people jog to lose weight. People jog to stay healthy longer in their lives. People jog because it gives them an excuse to go outside and listen to the birds. It's an activity. People do it for different reasons and have different feelings about it, right? So practicing masochism is something that people do for a range of reasons. It's not like there's a kind of person who has to do it. There are people for whom some kinds of pain register as being directly erotic. It just it's this is, yeah, I feel it, yeah, it hurts, but instead of that pain telling me no, make it stop, that pain tells me I'm going to come soon. There are people who enjoy masochism as a kind of ordeal or absolution, like to show how much they can take. There are people who enjoy masochism in a power exchange kind of way of showing that they are subject to someone else, right? As a way to prove that I am beneath you and subject to your power. You can hurt me, and then I know that power exists, and that's why it's sexy for me, and more. And then sadism, same thing. There are people who really want to hit real hard and they love the physicality of it and they like getting to, reach back and wail on someone with a flogger. There are people who like the screams and the tears they get to create. There are an awful lot of people in the sadist column who like pleasing and impressing their partners. And that's really what they're doing, is that they're getting to master this sort of exotic kind of sexuality and then be able to deliver it to people who are excited about it. And then you get to excite your partner and you get to feel like you're a really great lover and you're doing something special, right? Not just fucking. Anybody can do fucking. Look at me. I'm a master with this whip. And people who love whips can come to me and I will whip them and they'll be like, oh, you did that so great. It really turned me on. And it's not actually so much that I love hurting people. It's that I love being a maestro of sexual technique and I love being in demand, maybe. I love pleasing my partner. A lot of sadists aren't exactly sadists, right? So, yeah, if you're interested in that world, the whatever reason you're interested in it for is probably okay, right? There's also a tendency of people to be like, oh, I don't know if I'm a real masochist because, I don't like it when I stub my toe or whatever, to sort of talk themselves down about whether they really count. You count, whatever it is that you want to do under the rubric of BDSM, you can do that. You don't have to worry about whether you are doing enough or whether you're doing it for pure enough reasons. If we segue to DS, that's a huge thing in DS is tremendous. Like, so many people concerned that they're not real enough or not good enough, not enough of a submissive or not a real dominant. It's like, I feel like most people who want to explore DS worry about that at some point or another.
Do you feel, just on a little side track, I'd be interested in your thoughts. Do you look at the state of the world and have a little bit of concern about polarity and DS at this stage?
You
Or
mean
am I the only person who's worried about where this is all heading?
you say the state of the world, like how playing with power in DS connects with or is in
Yeah,
conversation with
maybe I should expand on
oppression
that
in
a
the
bit better.
world?
The way that my kind of initial concerns is the way that the depolarization of the masculine and feminine, if we're looking at kind of traditional, is heading, and how that might be impacting a dominance and a submissive. Are you seeing any kind of place where the population is kind of heading towards this middle ground where masculine's becoming more feminine, feminine's becoming more masculine, and the depolarization in the middle? Or is that not of concern in your eyes?
Interesting. Yeah, I guess in short, I'm not concerned about a depolarization of gender. I
Mm,
think in the world of the little subculture of kink that I swim in, I see a lot of people choosing their polarizations, right?
mm,
Exploring different ways of playing opposite to one another and like
mm,
balancing that are around gender. But like power exchange is interesting because it is polarized. It is inherently polarized, right? You're making up a polarization, and it is historically and culturally bound to gender in really big ways. Like, I like to say that if you're a dominant cisgender heterosexual man practicing consensual dominance, the only kinky thing about that is the consensual part, right? The
yeah.
you being everything else is just normal.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But when it's working well, I think kink provides a way for people to think about polarization and to make their choices around it and to
Mm,
explore a good fit for them. It can also there is also a current of what I might call reactionary kink, which is more like, I'm mad about feminism and I found a world where I see, women kneeling in lingerie, and I think that means that I can kind of go back to a pre-feminist sort of world where
mm.
men are men and always are in charge, and women are kneeling in lingerie. So there is that kink community also, where people are not so much choosing whatever fits for them, but are taking the tropes and the language of kink and just retrofitting patriarchy into it.
That's fascinating.
Um,
It the language, yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. I think from an old school point of view, it'd be how long have you been in the game of the kink game, the BDSM?
since the mid 90s, I guess. So about 30 years-ish now.
I assume that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I assume that DS has opened up away from, kind of to speak to your point a little bit, opened up away from, maybe if we're talking heterosexual here, a gender specific, e.g., the male comes in and he kind of thinks that he should be more dominant. The female comes in and
Yeah.
she thinks she should be more submissive. I assume that's opened up a little bit more over the last 15 to 20 years, has it?
It's hard to know how it's hard to see global currents for
Mm,
with any confidence, right? Because it's not like there's a whole lot of actually there is some large scale study done on
mm,
on kink, but not so much that I can very confidently say, oh yes, all over the world there's been this trend. I think there is still and always a preponderance of people assuming that men should dominate and women should submit, especially, sort of coming into community. If you look on the internet on like the big kinky online forums, right, which if anyone is not aware, this being like a community, there are whole social networking sites devoted to kink. There are conferences, like it's not just a couple people doing something in their bedroom, it's a whole subculture. So if you look on the kinky social networking sites, there are
what are these
many,
sites just for people?
oh
Have you got like one or two that you rate for those that kind of want to explore this deep world?
yeah. Well, frankly, there's one, 600-pound gorilla, and that is called FetLife. FetLife.com
How do
is
you spell
is
that?
the FETLIFE is the big Facebook for kinky people. There are others. There's a similar kind of a social networking site for kinky people called The Cage. I think there's something called Collar Space that I think is still exists, but it's sort of like with Facebook, one giant social networking site takes all the attention and all the users. So everybody ends up on FetLife. And yeah, if you go there and you look at numbers of profiles, you'll see hordes of men marking themselves as dominant. Is where I was trying to get to with this, is the sort of the entry level, the first step is there's this sort of assumption of gender going with power orientation, and a lot more work to do for people to break out of that if they want to, right? It is hard and scary for a man to say, hello, I'm Bob and I'm submissive, right? You're not supposed to do that in some really potent ways. So you see a lot of, if you're talking to people behind the scenes, women who dominate will tell you that, yeah, they get messages from lots of those men with the little dom mark next to their profile saying, hey, could I secretly submit to you? Right? Because it's what they want, but it's not what they're supposed to want. So they can't admit it publicly yet. And the same thing the other way around, right? Women are not supposed to want to dominate. So they come in being like, oh, well, I guess I'll be a bottom. I guess I'll submit. And then it takes some effort to challenge that if they find within them the desire to play the opposite side. And something to throw in there is that, the polarity doesn't have to be a intrinsic characteristic of you as a person, right? It can be something you play both sides of. You can dominate in one way, you can submit in another. You can play one role with one partner, one role with another partner. Some people like to switch minute by minute as they are in a scene playing with one another, and just keep sort of tackling one another back and forth into opposite roles. It doesn't have to be like you pick one and that's you.
I think I'll cut this part out if I don't get the approval from my partner with it, but I'll just talk very briefly. I think one thing I found is I came into this space, and I would consider myself quite green in it still, very much thinking that I had to be the dominant, but also wanting to be. And what I found is that still feels like my natural state, but there's something for me in seeing my partner in that space. And again, it feels like I would choose dominant most of the time, but in order to see her in her power in that space, I find really cool. And similar, to kind of speak to your point, I did feel a little bit less masculine the first time I even kind of admitted that I would be open to submissive, which I know is my work, but I can only gather there's a lot of other blokes that would probably have that same attachment or that same issue with it. But there's something really cool, at least in my eyes, about seeing a new level of power in my partner, which is quite cool. Talking of power, why people want to, other than kind of getting off, and these are probably the superficial thoughts that people might be having around BDSM. Hey, I get off, it's good fun, bring something new into it. But what else is the benefit of exploring BDSM, the psychological components, how that might help people heal, how they take that out with them into the world? What are kind of, if we take it out a level, how else can BDSM help people in their own evolution and transformation?
That is a fantastic question. And I can think of a whole bunch of different answers that I've heard from different people. I'll have to kind of have to pick and choose on this. For me, one thing that I found really powerful, really growthful about it is that the practice of consciously negotiating power and thinking about it and talking about it has helped me to better see and more intentionally navigate other power dynamics out in the world. It is, as the white cis guy who is on top of basically all of the big societal power dynamics, it is a job or a project to start seeing them, right, and become more aware of them. And I feel like what I've done through power exchange in my life has been one thing that's helped me with that. has helped me sort of become more aware and notice when I am the beneficiary of a big power dynamic out in the world that is so common that it's basically invisible. It has also, it can help people well, something that you mentioned was starting to think about maybe the possibility that you might take a submissive role sometime and noticing how that felt like a challenge to your masculinity, which, yeah, I recognize that. I felt that. That's a great thing to explore, right? It is both some work you would have, both an indication of work that one might have to do, but also a road to doing it, right? A path towards sort of interrogating, well, why does that feel scary? Why does that feel like something that I'm not allowed to do? And thinking about our gender and the roles that our gender puts us into in new ways. Let me do one more, but I'm picking from a basically infinite list. For folks who have not been handed a lot of opportunities to be in authority in their lives, I have heard a lot about how getting to take a dominant role with a partner has been really like refreshing for one thing, like really help them feel like they are the kind of person who can be in charge, and also eye-opening as a getting to see what the challenges are of being in charge and getting to experience and sort of those challenges and start learning that set of skills. There's a big set of skills around holding power, right? And doing it in a reasonably well, that if you are not given the opportunity to practice that in other places, a power exchange relationship can be a really eye-opening and transformative opportunity to do so.
I think that last point speaks most to me in terms of really encouraging my partner in that dominant role and really hoping and wishing and seeing how that has transferred into everyday life, just in terms of her stepping into her power even more. So that's what kind of lights me up, is seeing the transference and just seeing her step into more of her power in her business and friendships and overall life. So I guess a real life example, that's kind of one that stands out to me. What if someone's starting in this space, and I'll reinforce what you've said a couple of times, this space is so much bigger than 99.95% of people have any idea. They like, it's endless to think that's, I'm, I spank a couple of times, so I've explored all there is to BDSM. My friend, you have not even touched the surface. But if someone's looking to like just dip their toe in, where do you even start?
There's a few ways to start, depending mostly on whether you already have a partner or not. Because if you have a partner or a potential partner for doing this kind of stuff with, you're starting with some thoughtful and loving conversations with that person. And my like top tip for having those conversations is to not use a whole lot of jargon, right? You've been interested in this, you've gone and you've read a whole bunch, you've picked up all this stuff. And so when you say to your partner who is not yet interested in or not yet knowledgeable about this, like, hey, I've realized that I am in fact a TPE and I want you to be my master, your partner is like, whoa, you just dropped something really heavy on me and I don't know if I want it. But if you say that I am having a growing interest in exploring, like intentionally exchanging authority in our relationship some, no, that doesn't sound as scary. Like use regular words that they know what they mean, and don't let your fantasies get ahead of you so that you're asking for some huge fantasy scenario. Start small. If you don't have a partner, you have great opportunities to learn about kink before jumping in and looking for one, because it's easy to, if you're looking for a partner specifically for kink, it's very, very easy to find the wrong one if you don't know what you want and you don't know what your looking for, and maybe if you don't yet have a good idea of what your boundaries are. So I always recommend that if you're not already like with somebody who you know and trust and are wanting to explore this with, that you don't start by diving in looking for a partner, but start by finding your footing a little bit. You can read some books. I wrote a few. There are many good ones out there. And in most places with, most medium to large cities that have an internet connection, there are kinky groups that meet socially. And FetLife, which I mentioned before, is a great way to find those groups. I said it's easy to meet a bad partner, meet the wrong partner. FetLife is also a great way to meet the wrong partner. If you jump straight into FetLife and you look at the personal ads groups and you say, hey, I'm new and I want someone to spank me, somebody terrible is going to show up to spank you in the wrong ways. But FetLife has this events directory where you can look up based on your location what's going on around you. And you can find probably somewhat near to you some kind of like meetup over food or a happy hour or some social meeting, not the gangbang, right? Not the orgy. Go for the social meeting and go talk to some people. That's how I would say you should start. Start by making some friends. And then once you go to the monthly happy hour a few times, you feel a bit more comfortable. You've talked to folks about their experience. You kind of learn the language a little bit. Then you start looking for someone to play with. It's a slower approach, but I think you get a better result in the end.
It's just to speak to that before we wrap things up as well. It's really interesting being in a world where I have friends and coaches and healers and therapists that are deep in that work, and then a lot of people that have never explored it, and they think that haven't explored it at all. If you go to a temple night or whatever it might be, that it's just going to be some massive gangbang where everything is just kind of a free for all. And if you do your research properly, there's a lot of really well organized events that are nothing like that, but
Yes.
also can completely understand, a lot of the stigma and the stories that come with that as well. So, and there are events that are like that as well. So just doing your research and
Yeah.
just taking your time with that, I think is important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if a big sex party where lots of people are just having sexy free for all is what you're looking for, those do exist.
Mm,
They can actually be done well and safely, though many are not done so well and safely. But yeah, if that's what you want in your life, you can get there. And I still think starting with make some friends and dip your toe in and explore with one partner and then go gradually is the way you're most likely to have a good outcome in the long run.
100%. Anton, where is the best place for people to find you and your work?
You can find all of my work off of my website at consensualdominance.com. That's got my links to my books, a bunch of every time I write another essay about power exchange stuff, it goes up there, and even a couple of online classes that you can take anywhere in the world that I put together when I was really bored during COVID lockdowns.
Mate, awesome. And as someone who's read your dominance book, I highly recommend those that want to understand and explore the world, a great place to start. So get the book, check out his website, and check out his work. Mate, thank you so much for bringing all your wisdom and magic and helping us break down this magical world that is the BDSM and kink world.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad you're interested in it, and I hope that you find your own magic in exploring it however you want to.